At 95 years old, Joanne Woodward rarely speaks publicly, but the world still listens whenever she does. For decades, people believed her marriage to Paul Newman was the closest thing Hollywood ever had to perfection, a flawless love story everyone admired. But now, in her quiet aging years, Joanne has begun to reveal parts of her life with Paul that she never dared to share before. Not the polished magazine version, not the glamorous Hollywood narrative, but the real, vulnerable truth she lived through, sitting in her Connecticut home, surrounded by photographs that capture a lifetime of love and struggle. Joanne finally admits that her marriage was far more complicated than the world ever knew. She speaks slowly, softly, but with a clarity that only age can bring. People saw what they wanted to see, she says, but they didn't see the nights of doubt, the years of sacrifice, or the truth behind our beginnings for the first time. Joanne opens up about the difficult start, the emotional storms that shook their relationship, and the choices that shaped their lives forever. Her truth is not meant to destroy the legend, it simply reveals the woman behind it. Telling her story before time silences it forever. The world remembers Paul Newman and Joanne Woodward as Hollywood's golden couple, the pair who seemed to float through decades with effortless grace and an unbreakable bond. But as Joanne reflects at 95, she reveals that their story didn't begin in perfection. It began in uncertainty, confusion, and a kind of emotional tension that neither of them expected. When Joanne first met Paul in the early 1950s, he was married, polite, and undeniably handsome, almost too handsome for her taste. She remembered thinking that someone like him belonged on magazine covers, not at an audition room table. She found him charming, but distant from the reality she lived in. Paul, on the other hand, felt an immediate pull toward her, though he never expressed it openly. Their early encounters were brief, professional, and overshadowed by the fact that Paul already had a family. Joanne kept her distance, insisting later that she never wanted to break someone's home, and she meant it. Everything changed when they worked together on The Long Hot Summer. The moment they stepped onto the set in 1957, their energy shifted. They spent long days filming, long nights talking, and slowly, the emotional walls between them began to crumble. Joanne was already rising as a serious actress, known for her depth, while Paul was still struggling to define his identity beyond his looks. He confided in her in ways he had never done with anyone, admitting his fears, insecurities, and the pressures that came with being labeled the perfect Hollywood man. Joanne saw the vulnerable human behind the blue-eyed charm, and that terrified her more than anything. She knew that falling for him meant walking into a storm she was not prepared for. Their connection grew quietly but intensely. They shared glances that said more than words, conversations that stretched late into the night, and moments of honesty that bound them together long before they admitted it. But Joanne never forgot the reality. Paul was still married. She tried to push him away, but the truth was undeniable. Their feelings had already rooted themselves deeply. Paul eventually made the painful decision to end his marriage, a choice that brought judgment, guilt, and emotional turmoil into both their lives. The world would later see it as a romantic sacrifice, but Joanne remembers it differently. She remembers the tears, the fear, and the heavy weight of responsibility that she carried quietly. Looking back now, Joanne finally admits something she kept buried for years. She didn't fall in love with Paul Newman's fame or his beauty. She fell in love with the man he was afraid to show the world, the insecure dreamer, the flawed husband, the confused artist trying to find himself. Their beginning was far from magical. It was fragile, messy, and filled with risks she never wanted to take. But it was real, and that reality, she says softly, was what made everything that followed both beautiful and unbearably difficult. Once Paul Newman and Joanne Woodward committed to each other, the world watched with admiration, assuming that their love would make everything effortless. But Joanne reveals now, at 95, that their early years of marriage were far from simple. Fame, film schedules, and public expectations created pressures that neither of them had anticipated. For Paul, the camera had always captured the best angles of his life, while behind the scenes, the struggle to balance ambition with emotional intimacy took a toll. Joanne found herself navigating a world where every smile, every glance, Every public appearance was scrutinized and often misinterpreted. She recalls nights when Paul would come home exhausted from filming, his mind restless, and the couple would sit in silence, words left unspoken but heavy with meaning. We were together, but not always connected, Joanne admits. The world saw our picture-perfect moments, but no one saw the fatigue, the frustration, or the longing we carried individually. She speaks now with the honesty she never allowed herself publicly. There were moments I doubted whether love could survive this kind of life. Fame isn't kind to couples who aren't prepared. Financial success brought its own complications. With Paul's films becoming box office hits and Joanne's career rising steadily, the balance of power and influence between them sometimes shifted unexpectedly. Joanne confesses that she occasionally wrestled with feelings of invisibility, of being overshadowed by Paul's magnetism. Yet, even in those moments, she felt a profound connection that transcended the superficial challenges of Hollywood. I never loved him less during those hard times, she says. I just had to learn how to love him differently. The public's expectations also created tension. Fans and media insisted on their image as the perfect couple, a Hollywood dream team. But Joanne insists that reality was far more complex. She describes instances when the tabloids twisted small disagreements into scandalous stories, and the pressure to maintain an untarnished facade weighed heavily on both of them. People forget that we were human, she reflects. We argued. We got frustrated. We were scared sometimes. And still, we held on to each other, despite these challenges. Joanne emphasizes the importance of communication and compromise. She recounts the long conversations with Paul that shaped their marriage, evenings spent hashing out fears and insecurities, mornings of quiet understanding, and small gestures of love that never made the headlines but kept their bond alive. She credits much of their longevity to this willingness to be vulnerable with one another, even when the world was watching. Our love wasn't perfect, she admits, but it was deliberate. It was chosen every single day. Joanne also opens up about the moments of personal growth that came from their marriage. Living alongside someone so intensely creative forced her to confront her own ambitions, insecurities, and desires. She had to reconcile her own career with his, navigate jealousy and admiration, and find a sense of self that wasn't defined by him or Hollywood. I became stronger because of him, she says, and he became better because I challenged him. It wasn't always easy, but it was real. Looking back from the vantage point of 95, Joanne Woodward sees those early years of marriage not as a fairy tale, but as a crucible, a period that tested, refined, and ultimately strengthened their love. It was in facing doubt, fatigue, jealousy, and the constant glare of fame that they discovered the depth of their connection. We were two flawed people learning how to love perfectly, she says with a soft smile, her eyes reflecting decades of memory. And maybe that's what made our story worth telling. By the time Joanne and Paul had settled into their marriage, the pressures of fame had not eased. In fact, they had grown. Raising children in Hollywood while maintaining careers and a marriage tested them in ways that few could understand. Joanne reflects now, at 95, on the delicate balance between motherhood and love, revealing the challenges she faced in keeping both her family and her relationship with Paul intact. Being a mother and a wife, while also being an actress, required a constant negotiation, she says. It wasn't always fair, and it wasn't always easy, but it was necessary. Joanne and Paul welcomed their first child, Melissa, in 1965. The joy of becoming parents was immense, but so was the anxiety. Both knew the spotlight could be relentless, and protecting their family became an invisible, constant struggle. Joanne recalls sleepless nights, not only for the usual worries of parenthood, but also from the knowledge that their every move was scrutinized by the public and media. She often found herself making silent sacrifices, missing social events, declining roles, or managing Paul's erratic filming schedule, all in the hope of preserving stability at home. I wanted our children to have a sense of normalcy, she reflects. Even if normal was impossible for us, I tried to create a little bubble of it at home. Paul, too, struggled with the dual roles of father and superstar. Joanne shares memories of quiet conversations late at night, when Paul would confess his fears of not being enough. Not enough as a father, not enough as a husband, not enough as a man. Joanne listened, comforted, and reassured him, while also juggling her own insecurities and responsibilities. We learned early that marriage isn't just about love, she says. It's about teamwork, honesty, and sometimes putting the other person's needs above your own. The children, Jane, Claire, and Melissa, became central anchors in their lives, grounding both Joanne and Paul in ways their careers never could. Joanne admits that, at times, she resented the attention Paul's fame demanded, but she also knew it was part of the life they had chosen together. She made peace with it by prioritizing family over public appearances, instilling values of humility, kindness, and resilience in her children, while still supporting Paul's career choices and ambitions. We were not perfect parents, she admits. We made mistakes, but our children always knew they were loved first and foremost. Joanne also recalls the small, private joys that kept their love alive during these years: quiet dinners at home, late-night walks, whispered jokes in empty movie theaters, and simple gestures of affection that never made the magazines. These moments, she emphasizes, were what carried them through the pressures of fame and parenthood. Those little, unnoticed moments mattered more than any award or headline, she says. They reminded us why we had chosen each other in the first place, even in the face of exhaustion and constant public scrutiny. Joanne says the couple never allowed Hollywood to erode the intimacy they had built in the early days of their relationship. Each challenge, missed premieres, long separations for filming, media speculation, became an opportunity to reaffirm their bond and to teach their children the importance of honesty, compassion, and resilience. Life was messy, she says, but it was ours, and that's what made it beautiful. Looking back now, Joanne's reflections on this period of life reveal not only the depth of her love for Paul, but also the strength of her own character. She was a mother, a wife, and an actress, all while navigating the unpredictable demands of fame. And she did so with determination and grace. The lessons of these years, sacrifice, patience, humor, and unwavering commitment, became the foundation for the decades that followed. We were learning together, she smiles softly, and in that learning, we found a love that endured far longer than I ever imagined possible. As the years progressed, Joanne Woodward and Paul Newman's marriage matured into something rare, almost mythical in its depth. Yet, Joanne admits that even with decades of shared life, love, and laughter, challenges never truly disappeared. Fame faded slightly, careers shifted, and the inevitable toll of age and health began to appear. But through it all, their bond remained steady, rooted in respect, admiration, and a profound understanding of one another. We grew together, Joanne reflects, not without mistakes, not without arguments, but always together. In their later years, Joanne watched Paul face both triumphs and trials, from awards and public adoration to health concerns that reminded them both of life's fragility. She recalls sitting by his side during difficult days, holding his hand, listening to the unspoken fears that come with aging. There were nights when I felt helpless, she admits softly, but I also felt immense gratitude. Grateful for every year, every day we had together. Their love, once tested by fame, ambition, and family pressures, now faced its greatest challenge, the understanding that their time together was finite. Joanne also opens up about the quiet moments of reflection they shared, often in the stillness of their Connecticut home. They spoke of life, regret, forgiveness, and the beauty of a love that had endured despite all odds. We would sit for hours, she recalls, and talk about the past, laugh about our mistakes, cry about the losses, and simply enjoy being together. It was in those moments I realized love doesn't always roar. Sometimes it whispers, and that whisper is enough. When Paul passed away in 2008, Joanne experienced a grief that is difficult to put into words. Yet even in her mourning, she emphasizes the joy and fullness of the life they had shared. She describes her husband not just as a cinematic legend, but as the man who challenged her, inspired her, and shared her deepest fears and hopes. He wasn't perfect, she admits, but he was perfect for me, and that's all I ever needed. Even after Paul's passing, Joanne continued to honor his legacy in both her private life and public engagements. She dedicated herself to preserving his memory, supporting charitable work, and mentoring younger actors, all while living a life marked by grace, dignity, and humility. She admits that her days are quieter now, but her memories remain vivid, a tapestry of love, struggle, laughter, and unwavering devotion. Looking back at 95, Joanne Woodward reflects on a lifetime of love, sacrifice, and partnership. Her revelations about Paul Newman are not about scandal or secrets. They are about truth, humanity, and the enduring power of a shared life. "We were two imperfect people who built something extraordinary," she says. "And in the end, that's what I want people to remember, that real love isn't about perfection. It's about choosing each other every single day." Her story, finally told in her own voice, is a testament to love that endures the tests of time, fame, and life itself. Joanne Woodward's truth about Paul Newman is not a Hollywood legend. It is a human one, filled with all the complexity, beauty, and tenderness that real life allows. At 95, she shares it not for applause or attention, but to honor a love that defined her life and shaped the legacy of one of Hollywood's most revered. Couples,